Today, we're tackling a comment I hear all the time from parents. The school says they don't diagnose dyslexia. Is that true? I'm Karen at Decode IEPs, and today we're going to cut through the misinformation and talk about how school evaluations actually work, what schools can do when it comes to dyslexia, do you need a private evaluation, and what does it take to get an IEP? So let's dive in and decode it together. First, let's just say that you do need to know that schools don't give medical diagnoses exactly like a doctor or a neuropsychologist would. So technically, yes, they don't diagnose dyslexia. But that doesn't mean they can't help you. Unfortunately, some educators will imply to parents that they cannot have their kid tested for learning disabilities at school by saying things like, oh, well, the school doesn't diagnose dyslexia. Leaving out, but we can evaluate your child for a learning disability and consider whether or not they need an IEP. And that makes all the difference in how parents interpret these statements. What schools do is evaluate whether the child has a learning disability, and is that learning disability impacting their ability to access the curriculum or their education, and more specifically, whether your child qualifies for special education and get an IEP. So instead of diagnosing a condition, schools are looking at educational impact, and that's really like the magic phrase here. So good news, even if schools can't diagnose dyslexia, they are legally required to evaluate students when there is a suspected disability. So this is something that is part of child find, which is in federal law. And they are required to evaluate your child, see if they have a specific learning disability in reading, and whether they qualify for special education. So there's a lot of semantics in this. And just to be super clear, using the word dyslexia does not require the school to say no. And when the school agrees to evaluate, there's a bunch of things that usually happen. They test for things like reading fluency, phonological awareness, spelling, memory, processing speed. Like, they may use tools that are actually very similar to private evaluators, maybe even the same, like the GORT or the CTOP that you can use in private neuropsychs. But again, their goal isn't to diagnose dyslexia, it's to ask, does the student need specialized instruction to succeed in school? They just have a different focus. And that's what determines whether your child gets an IEP. So now let's say you actually already paid for a private evaluation and it clearly says your child has dyslexia. Shouldn't that be enough? You'd think so, but schools are still required to do their own evaluation. They need to decide whether a child qualifies for special education, and that's based on that educational impact. So they're supposed to consider your private report, but they don't have to accept it outright. It's one piece of the puzzle. And this surprises a lot of people that your child can have dyslexia and still not qualify for special education. It's not super common, but here is why. To qualify for the IEP, the disability has to be affecting the child's access to the curriculum and how it impacts their day-to-day life at school. And those things matter. And it's frustrating for parents that have these private diagnoses, but that is how the system works. So what can you do if your child is struggling and you're worried about dyslexia? Here are 3 simple steps. Let's say first, request the school evaluation in writing. You want to be specific, say that you're concerned about a reading disability, ask for testing in all suspected areas of disability. And once it's in writing, then you've started a legal process that has a timeline. And that is different than just verbally asking a teacher, can they test your kid for dyslexia? Second, you want to track everything. Save emails, notes, progress information, anything that's related to this. It will also help you make your case that your child needs an IEP and needs to be tested. Third, you want to just understand that services are going to depend on need and that diagnosis does not take you all the way to the end of the process and guarantee the IEP. If they say, like, we don't diagnose dyslexia, you can just say, I understand, but I'm asking for a full evaluation, see if my child qualifies for an IEP under a specific learning disability. Let's bring it all together because that was a lot. Schools don't do medical diagnoses, but they can and must evaluate your child if there's a suspected disability. Second, diagnosis alone doesn't guarantee it. It's all about educational impact. Third, you don't need private testing to get started. A written request to the school is enough to begin their process. And finally, start documenting everything from the beginning. Special education is a legal process, and having a paper trail can make a huge difference if you have conflict with the school. If you feel overwhelmed, like totally normal, totally get it. That's why we built Kidvocate, to help parents through the process and stay on top of everything, whether it's help writing a letter or tracking your documentation and evaluations, or you want to know more about how dyslexia is supported in schools. Visit kidvocate.com. We've got help and tools and answers, and I'll put a link in the description below. If you found this video helpful, please give a thumbs up, consider subscribing for more content about dyslexia and IEPs. You're not alone in this. We'll decode it together, and I'll see you in the next video.